Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'm hearing that you guys can see this. Okay, so today, I want to share about this thing that I wrote recently, which is how to evaluate long context question and answer systems. Um, this is like two parts to it. One is really an essential summary of how to, and after that we have another six papers. I did a literature review of a couple papers, and then we'll summarize six papers. So I think one thing that I think long context Q&A is slightly different from shorter Q&A. Is that for longer context, you have a lot of you could actually retrieve a lot of irrelevant details, which leads to information overload, and then of course it actually leads to more occurrences of hallucinations. And then for longer context, you might actually have bigger questions that come across like, hey, can you summarize everything that I've read so far? Or what is the main theme of this person's thesis, etc. And you may also have questions that require you to hop across multiple chapters. Where did Dumbledore, what were the Horcruxes that Dumbledore destroyed? You know, and you have to hop across different areas of the book in Harry Potter, or even across the entire series. So that's where it's maybe a little bit more challenging. So this is what we're going to discuss today. We'll go through the dimensions of faithfulness and helpfulness, and we'll also talk about how to build a Q&A data set. I don't think I'll go through the existing benchmarks. You can read it on your own. You can read my summary in the write-up on your own, and then after that we go through it. So the key evaluation metrics, I think there are two. They're actually definitely more than two, but these are the two key ones that I think most people focus on for Q&A. The first one is faithfulness, which is how strictly the answer relies on only a source document. So I think this is important, right? If you're asking a question on let's just say you're asking a question on Squid Games, which is the new Squid Games came up. I know it's like maybe an alternate reality, or maybe it is reality. And you're asking a lot of questions. You want to make sure that it's answering questions solely based on the Squid Games show. And it shouldn't be including things from outside of Squid Games, even in the real world. That's what faithfulness is about. And a big chunk of that is actually knowing when to say I don't know. So if you're asking a question and that answer actually doesn't exist in your context, the model should be smart enough to say something like, I don't have the information in the provided text. That is actually the right answer that we would expect, right? We don't want the model to try to make up something. And I think depending on what you want to do, we may not want the model to use its own knowledge, and we actually may not also want the model to use web search. Well, it depends on whether we have the web search toggle on or not. But that's one thing. So if you care about faithfulness, this is the main thing that you should be focused on. So therefore, we consider faithfulness, you can think of false positives and false negatives. A false positive is that when the model makes up an answer that doesn't exist. This is essentially a hallucination. A false negative occurs when a model says that um, you know that the document has the information, but the model says that it doesn't exist. So this could be because you're doing retrieval badly, or this could be because the model just can't pay attention to that large amount of text. And we call this as, the loss in the middle problem every now and then. Um, oh, Sean, I had a fun hallucination today. Gemini completely made up timestamps and summaries for our podcast only based on the title. So that's one of those things, right? Where you're using a model in your ETL pipeline, and it shouldn't be making things up because I guess we kind of expect it to work at ETL. And also I think there's a small distinguishing. We want to distinguish faithfulness from correctness, right? So again, imagine we had a historical fiction with alternate timelines where the outcome of World War II was a different outcome. And if you're asking a question of that question, you want to summarize what happened after that, you should be getting what is faithful to that alternate fiction, the historical fiction with the alternate timeline, instead of what actually happened in the real world. Because I think that's what users would expect. So that's the small difference. In this case, I care about faithfulness, but you may care more about correctness. But essentially, you want to distinguish those two. Now, the other thing is that a faithful answer isn't always a helpful answer. So maybe you might be asking a question about, hey, what was the crime the person committed? And the answer is maybe what is the crime the person committed, but instead they will say that, oh, you can find the crime the person committed on page 6 or page 9. That is actually not, it's a faithful answer. It's actually not a helpful answer. Or maybe the model could say something that's completely irrelevant, which is that, oh, the law is about something, whatever law it is. It doesn't actually answer the question on the crime that was committed, but it is faithful to the text. So in that case, those faithful answers are still not helpful. So how do you think about helpfulness? I think that there are a few dimensions to it. I think it's three main dimensions, and some of these are intention. So relevance means, does the model actually answer the question? Comprehensiveness means, does it have sufficient enough details? And sufficient enough details is almost like a recall problem, right? You can just spam all the details and be very comprehensive. I think the balance here is with conciseness, whereby you are comprehensive yet concise. So that's the tension between both of these two. And in this study, by Shi et al., they found that domain experts preferred answers that were comprehensive and faithful, right? Especially long form questions. In contrast, crowd workers like sis, they often maybe emphasize surface aspects such as conciseness or detail, or emoji or more flowery language. So those are a few things you want to think about, right? When you're building your Q&A system, is it for experts, people that will know the content well, or maybe not? Um, so that is about the section on the two dimensions that we're considering about. Any questions here before I proceed? Yeah, I guess not.
Um, some of
Oh,
these, I mean, mostly requires a golden data set, right? Some ground truth golden data set.
I think I think for a start, yes, we need some ground truth golden data set to calibrate our LLM evaluator. But then once we have it calibrated, we actually don't need it. I think that's how I think about it long term. And I'll actually walk through that. Oh, but Sean doesn't seem convinced.
No, no, I mean, sure, like that's the only way to extend it beyond golden data set. It's just
Definitely.
not satisfying because it's so easy to get out of distribution.
Oh,
Um,
that's correct. That's true. So when you're building a golden data set, it does have to be representative-ish enough. And I think the benefit of building with LLM evaluators is that I'm not sure if distribution drift differs matters that much. So for training data, you can imagine, let's say you're doing e-commerce recommendations, you will always have new items coming out. So distribution would go down, right? Whereas for language or concepts, I think how you classify how you are do Q&A on financial documents, or unless there are new laws coming out, which don't really, or maybe new concepts coming out that set precedents. I don't think that happens as often. You might need to refresh every now and then, but I think the drift is a little bit easier to tackle than most other more conventional machine learning models. Shulang has a question. Based on experience, to implement the faithfulness and helpfulness metrics, would you recommend start with an eval framework or just write your vanilla LLM as judge? Um, Personally, and maybe this is a hot take, I actually don't use frameworks. I really like to just use the raw thing on its own. I find that a few times I've used a framework, eventually the framework really gets in the way of me trying to understand what's really happening and observe. It tries very much to do a lot of magic, whereby you can do very little things. You can write very little code and get something working. But personally, for me, that really gets in the way. Maybe I just need to be more okay with vibe coding and vibe eval. But that's my personal opinion. Yeah, MCP solves everything. I think MCP does go a long way in solving a lot of things. I'm a little bit more MCP pilled now. But we can talk about that later if you want. So
I have a bit of a question on this. So, in like normal chatbots, outside of faithfulness, like true, false, accuracy in your response, another metric that you also want to consider, or like another axis to evaluate your system, is do you understand what the user is asking? And is the user even asking the right question? Like, are they asking the question that represents the answer that they want to know? So when you tie that in with like a QA benchmark, you might be answering what the user wants, but not directly answering the question because they're not answering the question, right? Because like skill issue in asking questions, right? Like in Discord last week, someone was really trying to find a paper about what does AGI, like what's this AI future in a few years? And I'm like, oh, is it AI 2027? People recommended like three, four others. And like, basically there's an answer they're trying to get and there's a question they're asking that might not sync. But yeah, how do you deal with that with these sort of QA systems? 'Cause it's kind of overlaps.
That's a great point. I wouldn't even be considering that right now. I think it's really challenging to try to the user asking a question. The question's maybe not quite aligned right, but yet we have to try to guess what's on the user's mind. I think for search queries, so for things where we have a lot of organic data, like search, right? Like maybe the user just types iPhone, but you realize that they're not really looking for iPhone, they're looking for iPhone case. With enough organic user feedback data on the things they actually click on and they actually buy, we can actually do that. For Q&A systems, I don't know how to think about that right now. I guess
Interesting.
with enough data, we get enough questions, and then we would realize that okay, the faithful answer is maybe not what they really want. But then the follow answer, the actual answer is I actually don't know how to fine tune the model on that. Or
So the few domains that you can think of are like if you have customer service chatbots, right? Like
yeah,
Intercom Fin, or if you have like a chatbot that's like for an insurance agency, you have a like most frequently asked questions, right? So a lot of questions
ah,
fall into a few buckets, and most of the time users are trying to get to the same conclusion, right? So even though
yep.
they're not asking the question, right, what are they trying to get towards? Does it fall through one of them? It's just in that sense, the QA might have different sources. But anyway, side tangent.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Whereby if you find that this is what your users want, you may want to pre-generate those questions for them eventually or build it into your prompt.
Yeah, it's
Um
just from the background of working on one of those. Our QA metrics would always go down, but like end satisfaction would go up when we optimized for other stuff. So even
ah
if the direct QA was wrong, yeah, just weird little niche.
yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Next thing is how to build an evaluation data set. This is my take on it. I'm not sure if this is the best way, but I found this to be fairly helpful. I think the first thing is really building questions, synthetic questions, right? And everyone's doing this right now. You can just there's nothing unusual. Just prompt the LLM to come up with questions. But how to prompt the LLM to come up with questions? I've seen people do it in bad ways, and then I've seen people do it in better ways. So, for example, imagine if you are prompting an LLM to generate questions about a book, you can just say generate questions about this chapter. Now, this is going to go all over the place. It's really hard to constrain what you want, and essentially you probably come up with very fact-based questions. But if you specifically want to test the LLM's ability to answer questions about characters, one way to do this is, but here's what I might do. I might ask it to summarize the main characters in this chapter, then generate one question about each character's backstory. So you can think of it, this is almost like the first sentence is like a chain of thought. First, think through which are all the questions in this chapter and what have they done. Then, now, based on that summary of the main characters, ask a question about their backstory. So this is how I steer the LLM towards questions on the backstory. So you can imagine if you're a narrative, okay, questions about backstory, questions about setting, questions about plot, questions about climax, etc. So this is how you might want to do this. And I was inspired by this, by two papers which is covered in this post. The first paper is narrative QA. Oh, I realized I actually didn't even share this post. Let me share this right now. So you don't have to be taking down notes, or we have the recording, but everything is available. So the first one is narrative QA. They deliberately generate questions only based on summaries rather than full text. So this encourages questions that are more higher level, more narrative, that maybe may require multi-hop reasoning rather than just shallow fact recall. And Casper also did the same thing with with abstracts on academic papers. So when you're generating questions, you also want to have a range of questions, right? Here's an example of some ranges that I might have. Uh, the simplest question I think is fact recall. Who is the protagonist? Where's the treaty sign? Is maybe a short phrase, and you can probably find that in a single sentence or maybe a paragraph. The next one is a definition. Okay, what's this acronym? And then maybe a user's reading a very dense paper. What's this acronym based on everything that's in the paper so far? So now you, this is the ability of the LLMs to like, again, it's sort of like a summary, summarize this acronym so far. The next one is summarization. Summarize the main findings of the paper, or I'm in the middle of the book, recap what has happened in the book so far, etc. And then the next step goes, I think the first three, these are fairly standard. There's probably a right answer that you can have a reference answer for. The next three are maybe a little bit open-ended. So for example, here's a question, I don't know, why did Snape choose to behave the way he behaved towards Harry Potter? So that is a bit of motivations, a bit about interpretation, and depending on which series, which book of the series you're asking a question on, you may not have the true answer that Snape shares. So the LM may have to infer. So that's a little bit difficult. Or what can we infer about society from these laws? Maybe in the three body problem, right? So that's a bit trickier. And then there's also my favorite kind of question, which is the no info question. You know, anytime you have a anytime you have a Q&A, people are gonna rate team it. So for example, what did Gandalf do in the final battle of Hogwarts? Well, Gandalf wasn't in the final battle of Hogwarts. The LM should be able to know that, okay, yes, Gandalf and Dumbledore, these were the wizards that carried the battle or carried the series. But it should be able smart enough to say, hey, Gandalf is not in the final battle of Hogwarts. Are you referring to Dumbledore instead? Um, so these are things that you want to make sure that LM does not answer the question. And the other thing that I think is useful is to create a question so that they're robust to the position of evidence within a document. What this means is that, let's say you have a document that's maybe 100 pages long. You create a question based on the first 25 pages. You create a question based on the first 50 pages and then the first 75 pages. And then you try asking those questions given all 100 pages of the document. So the evidence is in the first quarter, the first half, and the third quarter of the book, of your document. And then you ask questions like this to see where it starts to fail. I think in the past, you might see this loss in the middle pattern. Uh, in my own benchmarks and evaluations, I actually haven't seen this anymore. So definitely still something useful to test on, but this doesn't happen as far as I can tell. Any questions here before we move on to our last section?
I have a interesting little thing. So I'm curious if you've tried this or if you think it would be useful. But when you have like a long context QA, this is kind of where needle in a haystack kind of grew out of, right? Have you considered with like domain specific stuff? So let's say like Harry Potter, if you inject in facts and you change facts, is this a good
Oh.
way to eval your QA system? So like with the Harry Potter thing, right? If I add in a sentence, let's say I add in Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, and you make up a little scenario of who wins that battle. Or let's say instead of like needle in a haystack where you just add in like a sentence, if you modify the story itself so the model doesn't just think it's like a little prompt injection, let's say you add like a paragraph or like a little section, does it still do good at those, right? Because I feel like it's hard to distinguish models' internal uses versus RAG context. And if you want to benchmark your QA and really see if it uses context, like, are there any fun little things like that that work well?
Ooh, that's a good point. So I think that's a good idea to inject it and see if the model can actually pay attention to this context that is out of distribution. Really, in this case, Harry Potter is definitely in all the models. Because there's just so many reproductions of it online on the internet. Um, that's definitely something to test. The other thing to test on is actually also to test on documents that you are certain that the model has not have access to. And these are great documents to test on. So it could be maybe newly published your team's own Confluence or wikis or documentations that you know the model doesn't have, but you are very familiar with, you can generate questions and answers on, or newly published books or movie transcripts. So those could be good things to test as well. I haven't tested the one whereby you inserted red herring content into the long context documents itself, and then ask questions about that. I haven't seen any examples of those myself,
So
but I think it worked very well.
my broader interest in inserting these sort of red herrings is actually not to see if the model can get off of its internal context. It's more so for multi-hop QA, right? So if you
Mm.
can inject in clauses, like let's say I have an insurance policy and I randomly inject a clause saying, if this happened in the month of May, now the model now has to
Wow.
infer, was it May? Is it today? Like, can it effectively QA, right? Because can it deduce step by step? Can it find the first thing? And like, are you even, this is a good benchmark for your retrieval, right? Are you retrieving the right stuff? Are you even retrieving clauses? So yeah, that's just where I come from in log QA. Because now, and then what happens when you add n degrees of complexity with this stuff? Because in the real world, this is still simple, right? If you have document or documents that have clauses, that's cool. But if we have like agentic systems that now need multiple tool calls to look up these, like you have to find the clauses, right? So step zero is really just you give it clauses, you give it documents with clauses, and they're fake, so they're not like super real. But then, when you take it to real world, you need to, they have to also find out, are there any clauses, right? My like very basic example is you go to San Francisco, you try to park somewhere, you try to park downtown, and you have like 7 signs telling you no parking on Thursdays, no this time, no that time, street
Yeah.
sweeping. And like, now you have context. You don't even have the retrieval problem and you're still struggling. But that's where I try to like, push it. So if you have to at one level have like, web search the what are the clauses, and then also in QA if you just add them in, can it do the multi-hop reasoning? Fine.
Yeah, this kind of scenario occurs naturally in some of the long context like QA I work on. So for example, assuming you work on movies, there's always a lot of plot twists, or there's always a lot of hidden narrator. I guess the one example is like The Sixth Sense. Before and after you realize that the guy is actually dead and a ghost, the answer will be different. So the question that Vibu has, I actually don't know. I actually never tried that. Oh wow, Corey is actually brilliant. That is one of the biggest headaches I've written about. I think a lot about, and I work a lot about, but I just haven't written about it here. Because I don't think anyone else would be interested in it. But there's a lot in that goes into Q&A for movies and books to make sure there are no spoilers. And you'll be surprised how often the model is going to try to be very helpful and actually just spoil the book for you or the movie for you. So that's hard. Lewis has a question. Why don't we have multiple levels of no info questions as we have multiple levels of available information comprehension? Totally, partially, slightly wrong info. Maybe it'll be something like an error analysis, or it just doesn't work that way. Well, I think that you could have multiple levels of no info questions, right? And I think as you start to get into labeling the no info responses, you probably need to get into that nuance. Um, Personally, I think that it's just easier at the start to try to separate it as binary. So if there is pure, if it is, and because I'm generating these questions, okay, so I think maybe Lewis is thinking of you're asking questions whereby there is completely no info, or you're asking maybe a two-part question and you have info for the first part, but maybe not the second part. I think that's a good idea. I haven't considered doing that. I haven't tried doing that. For me, it's really just very standard. Asking questions that I'm certain is not in the not in the info of the document, and I expect the model to say, I don't have the information for that, and it's just easier for us to evaluate. I think it's a good idea as we start getting as our evals on this no info questions start to saturate, we might want to make it a little bit trickier to try to suggest questions with partially no info, etc. But I haven't thought about that yet.
So
Okay.
apologies if
Oh,
you mentioned this earlier. So the focus here is not really on evaluation of questions that are inherently ambiguous or require a follow-up. So the example you mentioned earlier about Gandalf and Hogwarts, and you're like, well, maybe you're referring to Lord of the Rings instead, or
Yep.
right? So that's an example of something that would require a follow-up.
Yes.
So, but there's other cases like, so in the case of customer service, like was being mentioned earlier, maybe the customer has a question, you realize in order to answer that question, you have to maybe distinguish between two situations because in one situation, the answer should be X. In the other circumstance, it's actually the correct answer is actually Y. And the answer, if the answer does not include that context, you need to ask, oh, wait a second, the answer depends on whatever the Z context is.
Yes.
That's not captured in this framework, correct?
You're right. It does not.
Yeah.
So what I'm talking about here is really very, very basic, the high level, and you will have to tweak this to the nuances of your use case, whereby you want to suggest to make sure that you're suggesting follow-up questions that are useful to either make sure that you're not answering until you ask the follow-up question to get good context, just like how deep research will ask these questions before it kicks off deep research. Or you might want to say that, okay, I don't have the answer, and you might want to evaluate the helpfulness of follow-up questions as well that help you try to get to the answer.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ooh, have you looked at Deep Research Benchmark, by the way?
I have
Have you
not.
looked at the
Do they have
QA
one?
system? They have a browser bench. What is it again? Browser bench? Browser comp? Browser comp.
Browse comp.
Yeah.
Browse comp. Sean spent some time rerunning Deep Search on Browse comp. He only has not the greatest things to say about
But
Deep
it's
Search anymore.
yeah, it's just not really related to the tasks of deep research. Um, but I mean, it's still a challenging benchmark. It's just very, very good retrieval on the open web rather than the specific task of generating a deep research report.
Yeah, so I have a hot take. I think that for long documents, if it's a single document, you may not need to do retrieval. For multiple documents, depending on the size of the, I think it's just really easier not to do retrieval. Evaluating retrieval is actually really hard. Trying to do good retrieval is actually, I think, also really challenging, especially you need to think about how to have it asynchronously or like multiple steps, providing the user feedback, dealing with all that latency. I think it's challenging. I think you can do away with a lot of that and simplify it a lot. But that's just me. And I think the other challenging thing about deep research that is different from long context Q&A is that for long context Q&A, the search space is bounded. You're only limited to the document or the library of documents, and it's relatively bounded. For deep research, the entire World Wide Web, uh, okay, maybe it's sort of bounded, but it's so large that it's effectively unbounded. You could always find something, you could always get more information that's maybe valuable. And therefore, it's hard to know when to stop the deep research. Okay, finally, we'll go into the methods to assess the Q&A performance. So we talk about two dimensions, faithfulness and helpfulness, and we talk about how to create questions for them. Let's now look at how to evaluate for them. I think the first one is really for faithfulness. I would just really default to simple binary labels, whether it's faithful or unfaithful. Now, I know I say this simple binary labels, faithful or unfaithful, but later as we start to get into the LLM evaluation piece of it, it may not be that straightforward, but just we'll get to that later. And also related to faithfulness, there's no info. So for no info, there's actually three kinds of labels. One is the model tries to make shit up. This is clearly a hallucination. Two is the model knows that it doesn't have the info and therefore declines to answer. That's good. And the three is that the answer is clearly in the document and the model says that the answer isn't there. Now, this could be because the model can't pay attention to the long context, or it could be because of its retrieval error. So then therefore you need to figure out and look at the retrieved chunks to make sure that it actually has the answer. And try to understand the recall of retrieval is actually, I don't think you can actually measure recall, complete recall of retrieval. I think you can measure precision, but I'm not sure if you can measure complete recall. But if anyone wants to talk about that, we can chat about this after the next session about why I think recall is really hard. Then the next thing is helpfulness. I really think that helpfulness, the right way to do this is really doing an A/B test. And I don't mean an online A/B test. I think that it's essentially taking what you have now, and this is your control, and then updating your prompt, or updating your retrieval, or updating your document set, etc. And then generating another set of answers, and then you just ask people to ask them which one they prefer, left or right. This is really just pairwise comparisons. And I won't go into the details of this, but since Llama 2 and Llama 3, I mean, they shared it all in their papers. It's really easier to get people to decide which one they prefer over asking people to give scores, right? 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. Those scores are extremely subjective, and different people have different scores. It's impossible to calibrate them. But I think different people will probably approximately prefer the same better answer based on the criteria that you have. And of course, the criteria I have, these are just the 3 criteria I mentioned for helpfulness, which is relevance, comprehensiveness, and conciseness. So that's how we do the human annotation. So for human annotation, I think, so I said that it's traditionally considered a gold standard. I'm not sure if we would consider human annotation the gold standard now, even. I think that human annotation is necessary to get a small sample set to align your LLM evaluator to calibrate it. But beyond that, it's actually, you find that human annotation is actually very noisy, and we may not want to use it more than we actually need to. On the hand, LLM evaluations are actually, they have consistent systematic bias, but at least you know it's consistent, and you can update the prompt or update the model to actually remove that bias. But for human annotation, it's very difficult. And again, this is the usual spiel about if you're still using automated metrics like Blue and Rouge, you probably should move off them. I think they might work well for things whereby it's a one-to-one translation, a sentence to a sentence or a paragraph to paragraph. They work well for machine translation. But I think for open-ended tasks, I think they're pretty poor. And I highlight a few examples, not just Evals, several other benchmarks at the bottom of this that I go through at the end of this have highlighted this issue with these kind of automated metrics as well. So I'm not gonna beat that dead horse again. That's it. That's my end. That's all I'm saying about n-gram-based metrics. So to evaluate faithfulness, I think there's a standard approach that that we've seen in a few other papers, which is given an answer, you break that answer down into individual claims, then you evaluate each individual claim. And this approach has been tried, and many papers have been published about this. It works empirically, and they're just small tweaks here and there. So for example, imagine that this is the claim, this is the answer. The tenant breached the lease, they missed 3 payments, failed to maintain insurance coverage, and sublet the apartment without permission. So there are 3 claims here, right? Missed 3 payments, failed to maintain insurance coverage, and sublet the apartment. So then now you can check each claim against the source document and get the answer. Essentially, this is really just MapReduce. You break down the question into smaller pieces so the LM campaign, it can be a very specialized thing that just focuses on each of these claims and then find the answer. So this approach has been demonstrated in natural language inference based summarization evals, whereby they break it down into sentence. Q&A based summarization evals, again, where we break it down into multiple questions and then try to answer for that. And then claim generation and verification, which is this exact same technique here. So that's all I'll say about that. Then after that, to evaluate helpfulness, I think it requires a more nuanced approach because there's no definitively helpful way. What I would do is get maybe a couple hundred samples, ask people which one they prefer, left or right, 1 or 0. And then I would try to align an LLM to do the same pairwise comparison and evaluate it on Cohen's kappa. Oh, this is actually what I say here. Pairwise comparisons and evaluate on Cohen's kappa. If the Cohen's kappa aligns well enough with human annotation Cohen's kappa, which honestly 0.4, 0.6 is really, really good. Cohen's kappa doesn't really work like it's not a 0 to 1 thing. It's actually very hard to score well on Cohen's kappa. You can read up more about, you can just ask ChatGPT what's a good number for Cohen's kappa. And I think 0.4 to 0.6 is pretty good. So that's all I have to say about this write-up I have. Then after that, I talk about 6 other papers. I think these 6 other papers are all pretty good. That's the reason why I chose to summarize them, because I highly encourage people to read these 6 papers, or at least read the summary to get a sense of what these are. And I also went through another, I don't know, 12 papers. Most of these are good, but I think if you really wanted to use benchmarks, the first 6 above are pretty good references to go to. I think the rest only if you have the time, or only if there's something that is very specific, like this one. This bench is specifically for business and finance, right? And then this one is for specifically for very difficult retrieval. Um, so that's all I had for this. And here are some of the takeaways. So I don't know if anyone else has any other questions. Wow, no other questions. Maybe I lost everyone. No, I'm kidding.
I think
Okay.
uh
No, go ahead.
yeah, I mean I'm actually kind of curious about the all those last few papers. These are super rough. I feel like
Just
it should
just
be
take the links, give it to Gemini. Hey, Gemini, read all these papers and summarize
no
it
no
for
no
me.
no. Actually,
Yeah.
I think reading is not as useful as code. Um
Ooh.
and my experience of using simple evals, I think like there should be a simple evals for this, basically, that is a library that is just a standardized way to run these. I think that the last time that you did this, maybe like a year ago, there was some code that one of your readers wrote that implemented some of the hallucination and
The abstractive summarization one. Yeah.
like the
They did
summarization.
the NLS summarization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think like that would actually be more useful. And then obviously you can sort of just run that as a battery of tests. These are all pretty cheap to run. Um,
Yep.
and figure it out when you need to double click on something.
Why don't we have a paper reading club where we go through code/lab exercises? We do. Friday.
Yeah, and
Don, do,
actually
do we have the link for that?
just go to Luma LS. It always has a link. lu.ma/ls. Yeah, but AI actually usually does like coding related things, but this this
Yeah.
would this would be relevant. This would be very on target. Um, okay, I can present on Ernie if we have
Yeah, go for it.
other questions. I think this is a very big paper. Let me just paste the slides. Slides is here. It's a very big paper. I'm not sure how important it is, but I think as much as the paper club is meant for learning, I think it's very good for learning, even though it's not a frontier model. And I think that's that's one framing. The second framing I would say on reading this is that um, it seems like a sequel effectively to the DeepSeek V3 R1 as well as Quen 3 papers. So basically there's just the body of work coming out of the Chinese labs that is just a lot more open and um, I guess easy to read as compared to the US labs, all of whom basically don't share anything except for AI2 now. Um, assuming that Llama, Meta Llama is dead. So yeah, there's basically nothing. Even Mistral is no longer publishing much details. So I think I think basically Ernie is Baidu's internal language model. They've always made a lot of hype about it, but they've never really released it until now. So I think this is now both a very good paper as well as a publicly available open weights model that, according to Baidu, is being used all over China. I obviously don't really know how big a deal that is in China. It could be very big. It might not be. We just don't know. But this is a very serious paper, so it's worth learning. Um, I also put all these into Gemini and OpenAI, so if you need those. But I'll just kind of cover the main features that I thought was relevant.
Hey,
Um,
wait. Quick correction.
yeah.
Mistral latest paper is pretty good. Magistral, it came out June 12th. June 12th, good reasoning paper.
Okay.
As much
Yeah, I
as they
haven't.
don't reason, recommendation from Nathan Lambert to, good reasoning paper from Mistral earlier last month.
Okay,
Okay.
I haven't read Magistral. I just know like the yeah, Mistral Small or Code Straw didn't have that much. Um, okay, so yeah, I think it's important to always get a sense. Like this is how I wish papers were presented. Like I basically had to just go and rearrange a lot of things. Um, so these are artifacts that are being released. There are some MOEs, some non-MOEs, some multimodal, some not. Always useful to have base models because I think you can do a lot more interesting things than just chat with models, and I think that's very useful for research. Um, but like basically they've tried to fill out the complete matrix of every possible thing with regards to multimodality and reasoning and sort of the sparsity. Biggest claim, which nobody quite believes, but is that they're sort of GPT 4.5, but at 1% of the cost. Um, and but like I think there's several benchmarks at which they really did run against Quen and DeepSeek and O1, and they're at least competitive, which is very cool. Like I think those are basically the table stakes. It's very very high table stakes these days to meet when just releasing a model that at least warrants a bit of your interest. And so it's very, very hard to achieve there. I think as far as learning goes, you can talk about model performance all you want, but really like these are the things that last in terms of the ideas that are the contributions. They have three that they call out. I don't think these are super well organized because one and two kind of merge together, and the three is the post-training one. But I'll just kind of go through most of those in turn. But I think like probably the clearest picture that you should get from this is that they really lean into this idea that you want to have independent vision experts, and you want I think a lot of the normal classical sense of MOEs is that the way that MOE specialization works doesn't really work the way that human specialization does, um, because you want to token balance, and they sort of learn token by token rather than by domain. And you like the balancing objective actually tends to spread out expertise among experts, as opposed to concentrate them. So they have several different ways to do it. I also put these texts into GPT-4o to generate some slop, but it's just nice to look at. It doesn't really do anything. Um, so pre-training. Um, I always like these kinds of tables because they are nice references for the key parameters that people should know. I don't really see anything huge to call out, except for the fact that they are starting. I think this like shared experts thing is something that they're trying to make a dent on, as well as vision. This idea of like dedicated vision experts, which until now I don't think I've seen um, any other people commenting about that or touting that as part of their pre-training. I also like for researchers who are actually trying to replicate or reproduce, it's nice to see like magic parameters which they arrive at, and then just kind of use that. But it's definitely more art than science, I would say on all this stuff.
Did they share? Well, can you go back a slide? Did they share why the small and big ones don't have shared experts? Shared experts are interestingly only at the 21 and 28B kind of model, but not in the big one, not the 300B and not the really small. And
Yeah,
also interesting to note, I thought these sizes are very interesting. Like that 28B Mistral medium size is like a good sweet spot for consumer stuff. It's no longer the 7, 13, and 70Bs. 24B-ish models are doing pretty good. And then 0.3B just because they have to do on device. And then, of course, a fat chunker. But it's interesting, the chunker doesn't have shared experts.
Yeah, I honestly I don't fully understand it enough to tell you. I think that they've basically moved shared experts kind of into the routing layer. They've done much more work on the routing side. So they have a little diagram at the end, um, where they did some rearrangement of MOEs. Uh, where like basically I would the way I would characterize this is probably there's the work that a shared expert would do was moved up a layer. I don't know that for a fact. I don't think I wouldn't stand behind that as like that's a theory, not like something that's substantiated. It might just be hallucinated by me. Um, oh, another noticeable thing is that the way they name these models with the MOE models with the total params and the active params, this seems to be I think it was started by Quen or DeepSeek, but this seems to be like the clearest way to communicate in the name as to if it's an MOE, what are the active params? I think people are wisening up to the fact that, for example, Mistral has only been reporting active params as a matter of efficiency. And as the number of experts increases, this divergence in the ratio will get higher. Um, okay, let's go to multimodal MOE. So they spend a lot of time talking about this, and we have more diagrams on in their training. But they always have like these kinds of commentary. Um, uh, uh, we'll talk about this later. I don't think this slide is comes in at the right point. Data sets, basically no info as far as I can tell, not even about like the number of trillions of parameters they train on. They don't even say that. So there was a lot of blah blah blah. This originally was like data sets, nothing important was said. But actually, if you read it closely, it was they actually did do make a couple of comments. Basically, there's a lot of natural language data that is useless. So they use this DIKW framework. I don't know what that is, but they develop 5 tiers of knowledge and basically mine for data knowledge and also use synthetic data, which is kind of cool. Um, for multimodality, they use interleaved text and image. This is a very common technique now, not just for vision, but also for image generation. And then finally, for domain-specific data, again, um, a lot of like mining of data, but also particularly audio transcription of podcasts and YouTube. So they don't say anything about where to get their video and podcasts, but I think if you make more podcasts, you will become part of the training data, which is good. But that's it on data. It's really, really nothing specific, but like it has some hints as to what they think is important. Um, let's see, how much time do we have? We have 9 minutes. Okay. They have two kinds of losses, which I thought was worth highlighting. So I think a lot of sort of pre-training and innovation is in figuring out a better objective than the standard. One is router orthogonalization, which is uh, really focus on expert specialization, which I thought was kind of cool. Um, and balancing that with the other loss that they have, which is instead of standard cross entropy, they have token balance loss. Which normalizes by sequence length. So I don't know if this one has as big of an impact, but it was big enough for them to call out um, as unique contributions, which I think is interesting. Probably it also has more to do with multimodality than their sort of multimodal focus. If anything, I think this paper is giving much more insight into vision and multimodality training as well as vision MOEs, which I never really thought about. And this is substantiated by the fact that in the post-train section, um, okay, they have a modality routing section, which I don't like. This is their sort of visualization proof that these losses work and are better distributed. Um, I don't think you can read much from it apart from just like taking it on principle that this representation is correct. It's more balanced. The there's a vision reasoning side that I wanted to highlight, was down here, where they talk about the reasoning VLM post train, which maybe has been written about by Quen. I don't think so. I think I browsed the Quen blog posts, but they only put up blog posts. I don't think that I've seen the technical report yet. But here they actually give you the whole recipe for training vision reasoning models. And surprise, surprise, it is not just take a reasoning model, add a vision adapter, and you're done. Actually, they do a lot of vision reasoning as well. Part of it is caption synthesis of STEM images. Part of it is this sort of three-stage process that they illustrate here. But all of this is custom data. This is a lot of work. Visual STEM, visual puzzles, UI to code, hybrid reinforcement learning, just a lot of post-trained data that they use to tune their to post-train their reasoning VLM capabilities. So probably this is well known if you train reasoning VLMs, but I think this is the first time it was laid out so clearly, as far as I've seen it. I'll make a comment also on just their general RL, not just the vision stuff, because we're covering this a little bit out of order. So you have the base, and then in order to get the final post-train model, they went through a bunch of normal SFT, but then also three phases of RL. This is a general logic corpus. This is math and code, and then this is general again. I like that they separated RL for verifiable domains as well as RL for open-ended domains. And I think these are basically the two categories and terminologies that people are settling on. And so it's relatively clear that for math and code, you want something like this in terms of your RL. For non-verifiable domains, it is emerging work, including our friend Nathan, that you have some other things that you want to scaffold on, basically just very like checklist verifiers and reward models. It's still very open-ended, but like again, I like to see more work in this, and I think definitely um, this is like kind of the next frontier after verifiable, because verifiable is a little bit boring. Like everyone kind of knows what is verifiable. It's the stuff that is not verifiable that is interesting. Okay. There's 5 minutes left. I don't know if there's any other interesting notables. Oh, video sampling, video understanding. Again, not just series of images in chat format and they are done. They also do even more data and sort of post-train work, including timestamp rendering that overlays absolute timestamp onto each frame. Um, so they just slap the timestamp on there. So apparently it improves temporal understanding by just kind of reusing the ability to read text from the image frame, which is kind of cool. I don't know if this is like controversial or not, because obviously you're going to lose information,
That
but
seems very bitter lesson. Actually, you don't have to lose information. You can you can mess with images, just add it in like two colors that cancel each other out. The model can read it, or just append frames to the image, and now you can add in text. But it feels like you should be able to just learn temporal consistency without a straight time overlay. But anyway,
hmm,
if there's not that much more important, especially because like I feel like you actually mess with a bit of temporal consistency when you have like frames that go like back and forth, and now you've overlaid time. Some videos try to like have time jumps and stuff, and like, yeah, I don't know, it just seems weird. But the more interesting thing was actually the separation of vision thinking. So like I was talking to someone about this quite a bit last week about how different models do either hybrid thinking or thinking and non-thinking models, right? Like for OpenAI, you have the O series, which are all thinking only models, and then you have like the regular models, which are not thinking models, and they separated them, and you have to like do your own like you have to basically load the entire model and serve it separately. But then there's like Claude, which has hybrid thinking models. And it's not that different to do these, but then for like vision thinking, one thing that you can do is basically you already have, it's not like a different model architecture to do thinking, right? It's just RL on next token prediction. And now the model will put out more thinkings before kind of boxing its answer. So as long as you can encode the same modality in the same latent space, like if you can encode in images into a thinking model, it should be able to do the same reasoning style thinking per se over the image domain. Now, stuff like this just shows that you can have specific visual like reasoning questions in the training data, but you don't necessarily need it, right? And like it's kind of a switch that you can turn on and off with an adapter. But yeah, they just take it further. But then I thought the more interesting, broader discussion is like when to do thinking and non-thinking versus hybrid models. But anyway, 2 minutes. I don't want to take your paper time. You're muted, by the way, Six.
Oops. Yeah, I'm done.
Oh,
I think a lot of cool ideas, and unclear how much they work. And obviously, I think we have like 2 paragraphs here on video, like 2 paragraphs on data management, no code. So it's just all like, cool, man, good for you, that's where I'm at. But like for model architecture wise, they were actually very, very open, which is very cool. So I think that's
I don't know
and
how cool
also
that is. I feel like once you give out weights and like people know
yeah,
how to inference those weights, you'll find
right.
out anyway. Like you'll find
Yes,
out active. Yeah. So
like exposing the thinking and why, and doing this stuff helps people to learn and also contrast models easier. Um, okay.
yeah,
Any other questions, thoughts, comments? I'm catching up on questions. Blah, blah, blah.
your
Gemini.
Discord invite server link is apparently broken.
Okay.
I created a new one. I think it should work now.
The link is broken. Where is it broken?
Yeah, yeah.
I, I think the invite link usually only lasts 7 days by default if you try to invite someone.
Right.
So I changed it to a evergreen invite.
Maybe on the Paper Club link, it didn't do that.
But it's good to know if we have like a big one that's broken. Should just update at some point.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway,
Thank you, guys. Very
yeah,
good
that's
Thank
presentation.
fine.
you.
Any volunteers for next week? Volunteers.
Yes, any volunteers? Latte, are you volunteering for next week? No.
Someone do the Mistral thinking. I will volunteer
Yeah,
someone.
we need Magistral.
Magistral.
Yeah, he caught me
If
not.
someone wants, we can half and half it. You do half, I do half. I do the half you don't want to do.
Yeah.
I'm gonna volunteer myself to do half, so someone has to take the other half. Unless we want half a paper next week. Someone do half the fucking paper. No, thank you. Someone do half.
Pardon me, just a quick question on like
Ooh.
before we get to the shared experts and things like that from the Ernie paper, is there a definitive paper on like MOE and like how mixture of experts came about or with a certain model paper?
Oh yeah,
There is an
definitely.
MOE.
The OG one is no Shazir.
Okay.
What did he wrote about? Is it the LSTM MOE?
I don't know.
So just look up Shazir et al. MOE.
Oh
I have
yeah.
a list of good MOE papers. You can post at some point.
I'm dropping the list.
Thank
I'm
you guys.
dropping that paper in the chat.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's basically there's a history of MOEs. You would definitely have to put Mistral 8 times 22B there, like
Mhm.
Mostral. I forget what the
Mixtral. Mixtral.
Mixtral.
Mixtral
Yeah,
8
yeah,
times
Mixtral.
22B. Yeah.
That was
But
probably the
no,
biggest
no,
like launch of that MOE, huh?
I don't know if it was the 8x22B. It was the
8x7B.
8x7B.
Yeah,
7B
yeah.
was the
Oh,
first one.
7B.
But
Oh, okay.
7B was first, the 22B was their update. But the more interesting thing in like history of mixture of experts is like sparsity, like dynamic, active versus not active. So like you have a super sparse one, like Llama is 16B active, but 400 total, right? So like those were kind of the advancements. And then the very basic papers are just like, okay, here's a routing layer, here's here's what mixture of experts is. But yeah, I think it'd be cool if we go over. We'll be part of Timeless Paper Club. We'll have a whole MOE day.
Got it. Thank you guys.
Cool, guys.
So who wants to do the Mistral paper with Vibu next week? Volunteers get a special Discord badge. Swix is going to create a special latent space volunteer badge, and you get privileges.
Give me a badge like this. Cute
Yeah.
badge.
Or you can
Is
have a
it?
badge like this. Let me give
It's
you
a
badge too.
it's a digital badge. Oh.
I can give you this badge.
Oh.
Oh shit! I should. Virtual badge. Oh, there. You can have this badge. This
Okay,
specific one.
I'm gonna up it. Mochi, I'm gonna give you this
The
dog
badge.
if you if you volunteer.
Okay. It looks much is
Okay,
up
I
for
mean
grabs. Okay, it's
just
fine.
volunteer on
It's
the
fine.
LM Paper Club Discord channel.
Yes, please.
Otherwise, yeah, we'll probably have Magic Straw
I'm gonna
next week.
volunteer Fatima at some point because I know she's watching. Hi, Fatima.
I
Badge kind of
would,
lit.
but we have a product launch next week, so.
Aw.
Okay, you can do the week after.
You
Okay,
know,
no pressure, no pressure.
I
Do
want
it
the
when you're free.
badge, the dog, the pin, and Discord privileges.
Jesus. How about we give the second dog?
Hey,
There's
go
two of
Chelsea.
us.
Latte.
Where's Latte?
Oh,
Latte came straight to.
someone is volunteering in the chat.
Yikes,
Oh.
sicko. So many
Who?
puppies. Yikes.
Yeah, yikes.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah, I'll take like a backup slot, but somebody that hasn't done it before should definitely do it.
Yeah.
Because I've done it before, and I can give myself the badge because I have mod privileges. So I can
Volunteering
see
is the
you
gift
guys
that keeps on
can't.
giving.
So yeah, so I don't know if anybody finds it, or if anybody finds the topic interesting, then you should definitely take it from me. But I will take it if nobody takes it.
This you
Yeah.
can have this 1-year-old doggo. Doggo is
Oh,
1 now.
God.
You can have the whole girly.
I'm gonna have
Yeah,
so
happy
many
birthday
puppies.
to Vivu.
Oh, is
Doggo
it
birthday dog.
birthday? Happy birthday, dude.
Thank
And
you.
Mochi.
And Mocho.
Actually, it was my
Mocho.
birthday yesterday too, so happy birthday, guys.
Oh,
God, my
Wow, you
birthday.
should have same birthday with Hassan.
that's on too.
Okay, guys, we're gonna have happy birthday dumplings.
Okay.
Happy
Okay.
birthday,
Right.
Thanks,
puppies.
guys.
See you,
All right,
everyone.
good night.
Bye.
Later.
Take care.